Well, I can't just log here real quick for the rest of my
My youngest aunt on Nancy, she can't parallel park at all, so she parks like 2 blocks away, where she doesn't have to parallel park.
I'll get you a car at the
I know.
Very
Hi
sorry.
guys. Okay.
So,
Alright, so thank you for coming to my lesson today on leukemia, and which is basically a cancer that affects the white blood cells. It's not working. Start over. Okay, no, I'm not going to do that, don't worry. I just need to figure out how to
Right, left, yeah, keyboard. What was it? There
I
it
can't
goes.
hear those words, don't worry. Leave it out.
Okay, I still don't know what this word is. Alright, so thank you for coming to my lesson on leukemia, which is basically a cancer that affects the white blood cells. And so my lesson plan for today is for you guys to understand the definitions of hematology-related terms. And my second point is to have you guys understand the key concepts of leukemia, such as symptoms, how it's diagnosed. And my third point is for you guys to distinguish between the 4 major types of leukemia. And so I need you guys to understand blood components first before we into definitions. And so on your sheets are words that you can fill in as notes while I'm going through the PowerPoint. So what the bone marrow is basically a spongy tissue found in the bones, and it produces red blood cells, which is the RBC, white blood cells, and also platelets. And so this is this process of hemopoiesis happens in the bone marrow, and that's it pretty much produces the red blood cells and white blood cells. And the hemopoiesis has stem cells that will give rise to the myeloid and lymphoid stem cells, which I will explain more on later. They're pretty much the white blood cells that fight infection. And then there's also the word malignant, which does anyone know what malignant means? Other than looking at that. So, well, anyway, it's a cancerous cells that have uncontrolled growth. And so over here are just this picture over here are red blood cells, and at the top is a picture of a white blood cells. And then over here, this is a platelet, and again, this is a red blood cell and a white blood cell. Okay, right. And this diagram just shows the hemopoiesis process. And so over here, up at the top, is the blood stem cells that will give rise to the myeloid stem cells and the lymphoid stem cells. And those will then differentiate into the red blood cells, the platelets, and the white blood cells over here, which are the lymphocytes, and they're broken down into 2 different white blood cells, and the myeloid cells. And so more blood components is that the neoplastic clones. And the neoplastic clones are important to understand because how they're the origin of leukemia. The neoplastic clone is the cause of the mutation that occurs that causes the leukemia. So the neoplastic clone will give rise to the malignant cells, which means that they will give rise to the cells that are the leukemic white blood cells. And so then is the leukocytes, which are the white blood cells that I mentioned, that are categorized into either myeloid or lymphoblasts, and these fight infection as well. And lymphocytes, that's the categories, produce antibodies that fight infection, and those come from the lymphoid stem cell. And going back to the slide, as you can see, these are the lymphocytes that I just mentioned, and they come from the lymphoid stem cell. And it's important to know the distinction between the lymphocytes and the myeloblasts because of differentiating the leukemia into either myelogenous leukemia or lymphoblastic leukemia. And that's what I just talked about, the granulocytes, which come from the myeloid stem cell line. And this diagram over here is a picture of a blood draw, and next to it are the blood components that make up our blood. And as you can see, over here are the plasma, makes up much more of the blood, and the red blood cells and also the white blood cells. And so again, this is another picture of hematopoietic stem cell differentiation. So you can see the bone marrow up there, and how it will give rise to all these different types of cells. And right here is what I mentioned before, this is the hematopoietic stem cells. And here are the lymphocytes that come from the lymphoid stem cell, and the myeloid cells that come from the myeloid stem cell. And all those are other blood components that are made up, that are produced by the bone marrow. Sorry. Okay, so what is leukemia? Well, leukemia is, just like I mentioned before, it's a blood cancer that affects the white blood cell production. And it results in the accelerated production of infection-fighting leukocytes. And the leukocytes, like I mentioned earlier, were the granulocytes that came from the myeloid stem cell line, and the lymphocytes that came from the lymphoid stem cell line. And so the hematopoietic stem cells will produce the immature lymphocytes and the myelologic granules. But they never actually mature into cells that can fight off infections. So that means a person's immune system is compromised. And so too many of these immature leukocytes will crowd out the bone marrow, since the production of those white blood cells take over the bone marrow. So not enough red blood cells are made, and not enough platelets are made. And on the other hand, the production of that many leukocytes or myeloid cells are immature, and so they can't fight off infections as well. Okay, so this is a diagram that shows where the bone marrow is. And it's usually found in the femur, which is thigh bone, and a hip bone. And in this area right here is where the hemopoiesis process happens. Oh, before I go on, does anyone have questions on the definitions or any terms? Definitely would be great to ask questions. Okay, moving on. So how is leukemia caused? Well, leukemia is caused by a genetic somatic mutation. And do you guys know what that means? Somatic, Tom, maybe?
It's a genetic mutation of some sort.
Okay, yeah. So these are just mutations that occur throughout a person's lifetime. And these come from carcinogens. Who can name off a carcinogen? Just real quick. Which means they're cancer-causing benzene, yeah. Maybe the sun. The sun is a, cancer. Anyway, so it's caused by genetic somatic mutation, and it results in the neoplastic clone to be produced. And as I mentioned earlier, the neoplastic clone will give rise to the malignant hematopoietic stem cells. So that means the cells that are made by the neoplastic clone are malignant, which means they're cancerous. And so the malignant stem cells will produce an abnormal amount of myeloid and lymphoblastic cells. So it will continue to grow, it will continue to produce abnormal amounts of the white blood cells. And the white blood cells that are produced are, like I mentioned earlier, are immature and are not able to do their jobs of infection or fighting off infections. And so the bone marrow then becomes crowded out by the excess leukemic cells and leaves less room for other blood components to be created. Okay, so now are the types of leukemia. So leukemia is broken down into 4 major types. And there's a lot more types of leukemia, so it's not just these. But the ones I'm going to be talking about are the acute myeloid leukemia, acute lymphocytic leukemia, chronic myelogenous leukemia, and chronic lymphoblastic leukemia. All right, so I'll talk about about the differences between an acute and chronic leukemia. And so what acute leukemias are basically